Hey guys, welcome to the debut episode of Admit It with Alexis, where we talk about all things college admissions, college related, college life, but we're also going to have people coming on the pod that are admitting it. They're going to talk about their personal journeys, how they got where they are today, and admitting the mistakes that they made, admitting, all the things that got them kind of into the situation that they're in, for good, for bad, for ugly, all of it. So I want to talk first, though, about how I got here. How am I sitting here? Why did I decide to do this podcast in the first place? Well, a lot of you, actually, I'm assuming all of you guys know me as the college expert, but I wasn't always the college expert. I started doing this kind of work a very long time ago. About 20 years ago, I started a private tutoring company right out of UCLA. I actually was tutoring at UCLA. That was my job. And I was driving all over the wilds of LA, Beverly Hills, Bel Air, the Pacific Palisades, seeing all these, I'm not gonna lie, like VIP kind of celeb families working with their kids. It was pretty glamorous, actually. And then I started my own tutoring company and I really loved it. I loved working with kids. And what ended up happening was, a seventh grader, lo and behold, becomes an 11th grader. And parents say, hey, can you help with college applications? I wasn't that far myself out of college. So I started helping people with their applications. And I realized I was good at it and people were getting in. And I thought, I feel like I could do this in a more robust way. So fast forward about 17 years and I started exclusively doing college admissions, and we still have our tutoring company. We still work with kids, but I do college admissions exclusively. And at College Expert, we have an amazing team of people that does that, from essays to private counseling, all of the things. One thing that really struck me when I started helping kids with their college applications was that things were changing so rapidly. So in my day, 195 years ago, we didn't even have the internet. Okay. So like when you were going to apply to Brown or, Santa Clara University or whatever, you literally had a brochure. Like we had I wish I had one here, like a pamphlet, and you'd look through it and you'd go, okay, what does Santa Clara offer? What are their majors? How many students do they have? And whatever essay you wrote went directly to that school. It wasn't like you had, some common platform where it was like, oh, send in this one piece of paper and everybody's going to look at it. I literally had to take the piece of paper, which was the application, and roll it through my mom made me do it on the typewriter. I couldn't handwrite the answers. She wouldn't let me. So I had to scroll it through, type in, what my name was, what our address was, all the things over and over and over again for every single school, put in the essay and then answer the individual essays. I mean, it was the biggest, I can't even believe that they didn't even have a streamlined process for that then. It just seems so ridiculous, but it was a slog. It was a lot. And you didn't apply to 20 schools. You applied to 8 because it wasn't really, I guess if you did apply to 20 schools, that's great for you. I'm going to take a sip of my matcha for you on that one. But I think I applied to 9 schools. And I remember that first meeting I had with my college counselor junior year or fall of senior year. I was with my college counselor and I went to Marlboro, which was a really competitive all-girls college prep school, or is a really competitive all-girls college prep school. It still exists today. It's been around for a very long time. And I was surrounded by girls in my class who, they were really smart. I mean, they're probably some of the smartest people I've ever met in my life still to this day. They are genius, powerful, amazing women. They were that way too in high school. And I was smart, fine, but I barely kind of matched up to them academically. I had to work really, really hard to get an A minus. So I remember sitting in my college counselor's office, who is still the college counselor there, and I love her to death, and she really pretty much taught me everything I know. And she looked at this dreamy list that I had. It was Wesleyan and Brown and Vassar. I mean, and to this, if I were my own client today, I'd be like, what are you doing? You're literally never getting it. Even then, even in 1996, or 1997, I was never getting into those schools. And I was a decent student, but even then. So I think I practically ran out of her office crying. And I know you guys can relate to this. For those of you who have kids who've just had their meetings with their college counselors, who are, junior year or sophomore year or whatever, or, you remember for yourself what that was like, it is no joke. The college counselor looks at you and they go, what? Let's actually put some schools that you're going to get into. And I remember the schools that they added were like schools I thought, oh, I'm never going there. That's crazy. And I imagined I was going to go to the East Coast. I was going to have that quintessential college experience. And backstory, by the way, I didn't come from a family that had like money. It wasn't like, oh, they were going to be able to pay full tuition for NYU or for, Michigan or any of these places. But my parents were awesome in that they, first of all, sacrificed everything to like send me to the school that I went to, which was, I didn't even need to go to college, to be honest. But also they were like, look, we're going to figure out how to pay for this. Don't worry about that. You just get where you need to be, and we're going to figure all of it out later. So I come to this process honestly. I wasn't a full pay student. I needed financial aid. I had to figure out how that was all going to work too. But I didn't worry about it too much in the application process. And that's something that I always tell my clients. There are different levels, obviously, to whether or not you can pay for a school or how you're going to do it or whatever. And we can get to that stuff later. But at the end of the day, you have to apply, right? You have to write the essays. You have to go through that whole, you have to make the selection of the schools. Maybe some of those schools that you select depend on who might give you money or who might not. But the application has to get done, and that's where we come in. But either way, sitting in this college counselor's office, she's like, you're not getting into these places, and here are the schools that I suggest for you. And I'm going, what are these places? I mean, who knows what they were like. I'm sure Elon was on there because Elon was always the joke. It was like, what is that school? And of course, coming from the West Coast, we didn't know anything in North Carolina unless it was Duke, basically. Barely even Wake Forest was even on anybody's lists. So it was probably a bunch of random schools that I'd never heard of. And I thought, I've worked so hard. How could this be happening to me? And I really felt like 1997 was the turning point for admissions. That was when things really started to shift and things seemed harder. And I remember parents at our school saying like, this isn't what it was like when we were applying. This is so much harder. Maybe not for a place like USC, maybe not for the UCs. So actually the UC started getting really hard at that time too. So I just remember thinking like, how can this be so complicated? I go to this really good school that my parents have sacrificed to send me to. I've worked so hard, and I'm going to, where am I going? Like, how come I can't get into Brown? Well, first of all, when I look back on that, I had no business going to Brown. I was not that kind of student. I wasn't a good enough student for that. And it wasn't a fit for me. And I would never have vibed with those people. It just wasn't my place. I ended up, my personal story is I applied to, I said 9 schools, 12 schools, whatever it was. I ended up getting 80% were no's, literally. Like I think I spent 3 weeks crying in my room. My mom was like, I thought you were never going to recover, never going to get over it. And I ended up getting waitlisted at University of Chicago. I got into NYU. Those were the two. So basically it was NYU because I hadn't heard from the UCs yet. And I was like, okay, I don't even know how we're going to pay for this, but I guess that's where I'm going. And then I had visited a friend who was at NYU at the time. And I remember thinking, I don't know that I can do this. I mean, I loved New York, but I just didn't even know how I was going to be a student there. It just seemed really hard and really expensive. And anyway, I actually appealed, and I got into Carnegie Mellon. I remember that, and I got into USC, which, by the way, at that time was a joke. And that's another reason why I find this process so fascinating, because 30 years ago, that USC was like, you had to be basically either, if you were a girl, you were searching for a rich husband, especially if you went to my high school, which was very much, if you belonged to a certain country club or you lived in Orange County or whatever, you were going to go to USC. That was going to be your plan if you didn't really have a good GPA. My husband probably had a C average and went to USC. So it was like, it's kind of like all these schools we talk about now, like Tulane, how is that so hard to get into? CU Boulder, what? that was USC is now that school. Like at that time that I was applying, I mean, I think every single girl at my all girls school got into USC. So I wasn't going to go there because that was like beneath me, apparently. So dumb. All of this is so dumb when you look back on it. I got into UCLA very late in the game. I remember driving up, my mom was driving me home from school, and there was a huge envelope on my front doorstep with a big blue bear on it. And that was still at the time when they would send envelopes to you. They don't do that anymore. They send an email to your portal, which is also sad, but also shows how much time has passed. I ran up, ripped open the envelope and was like, oh my God, I'm UCLA. And I tell clients this because I want them to understand the perspective that I was coming from. At my high school, going to UCLA was like I was staying home and spending an extra year at high school. The girls looked at me and they were like, oh, that's so cute. Like you're staying home. It was like I was staying home and going to community college. Like they didn't, not that there's anything wrong with that, by the way, and we're going to spend a lot of time talking more about that path too, but at that time and at the school that I went to, there was so much pressure. I was like, am I staying home? I thought I was going to have this really glamorous college, this Rory Gilmore, even though she didn't exist then, college lifestyle, like East Coast vibe. So anyway, it came down to NYU, UCLA, waitlist at Chicago, and then I was so pissed at Chicago. I don't know why I don't know why I thought I was so great that they would take me. I did have a good application. I remember my essay and it was pretty funny. Chicago always has funny essays. So I actually appealed my waitlist to Chicago. And I remember we were in my living room, I don't know, hanging out with family or whatever. And our house phone rang. We didn't have cell phones. So house phone rang. I picked it up and it was the dean of admissions. Hi, may I speak with Alexis White? This is Alexis White. Hi, this is whatever the name is. I'm just calling to let you know I received your appeal letter, and I want to let you know that we have a space that opened up for you at University of Chicago. I thought, what? So there were so many things happening. I was simultaneously so disappointed and disillusioned. I thought I was so great. I realized I wasn't as great as I thought I was. So that was kind of humbling. And then at the same time, I was getting all these kind of weird surprises. And that also showed me that this process is not linear. It also was a big wake-up call as far as, oh, this is kind of your first foray into real life and like real disappointment. You work really hard and you don't get what you want. Welcome to life. So I got what I wanted in that moment. But then I was like, maybe this isn't really what I want. Anyway, my mom said we're going on a tour of UCLA for Admitted Students Day. I said, it's fine. I'm not going to go, but whatever, let's go. And I remember we walked through the main quad by Royce Hall and Powell Library, and it was this gorgeous spring day, and people were like sunbathing on the lawn and reading and hanging out and playing Frisbee. And I thought, oh, what? This is really nice. I had the funniest, coolest tour guide. I fell in love with the campus, and I looked at my mom and I was like, this is it. I'm coming here. And she started laughing. She was like, oh, you were never going to stay in LA. You were never going to this. You were never going to that. But the chips fell where they were meant to fall. And that's so cliche because I tell clients this all the time. You're going to go where you're meant to go, blah, blah, blah. But it does generally work out that way. UCLA was a really good fit for me for a lot of reasons. I actually really wasn't ready to go away to college. I want people to understand in the college admissions process that fit is everything. And I think fit also includes, and I talk about this in my course, College Bound, when you're selecting colleges and you're putting a list together, one of the main things you need to assess is geography. Geography and then philosophy. Geography is important. And I never really sat down and thought, do I want to be cold? Do I want to be close to home? I'm an only child. I'm very close to my parents. It's just the three of us. I would never have survived living 3,000 miles away. I wouldn't have. I probably would have ended up coming home. I wasn't really mature. I was mature in a lot of ways, but I was not ready. I wasn't ready. I was still coming home every weekend. I was doing my laundry at home. I was spending the night at home every once in a while. I was I wasn't ready. So it definitely worked out the way it was supposed to. And in hindsight, when I think about how I advise people, whether it's on social or whether it's a private client or how I would advise my own kids, there's nothing wrong with staying home. There's nothing wrong with saying, I don't think I'm ready to do this. I need to go to community college or I need to take a gap year. But there's so much noise around you at school. There's so much pressure. I'm never going to get a good job. I'm never going to make any money. I'm never going to, and I blame a lot of it too on the culture that we live in, where we have sort of the Elon Musky Kardashian effect, where people achieving tremendous success at very, very, very young ages for very, very, very unusual and niche types of things. And then social media blowing it up in everybody's face. Basically, 17-year-olds either think that they need to be YouTube stars or 7-year-olds think they need to be YouTube stars. Everyone's looking at, you need to be an Instagram model, you need to be an influencer, you need to be a this, you need to make money that way, and no one ever remembers that when you're applying to college and you're 17, 18 years old, you are a baby. You're a baby. And when I look at students that I work with who are freshmen, and when they graduate at 21, 22, I'm like, oh my God, you're such a different person. It's the same thing. Parents, you know what I'm talking about. When you have a 3-year-old, the difference between a 3-year-old and a 7-year-old, that's what we're talking about. The distance between freshman and senior year of high school and then the freshman and senior year of college. So we have to remember that a lot of our kids aren't ready. A lot of our kids don't know what they want. Some of our kids totally do know what they want. I had no idea what I wanted, which is why I tell my story. I also want to go back to the chips falling where they need to because I needed money. And again, props to my parents for never saying to me I needed to make a decision that was money related, because I think it would have made me very stressed and confused. I think those conversations now, because it's much more a part of the vernacular and like pop culture and understanding financial aid and college admissions, and I think it's just a much more talked about thing. Then it wasn't really. So now when I have clients who are like, we really can't afford to send our kid out of state, and the kid's like, great, fine, I'll go, which it just wasn't part of that culture then, or at least especially at my school, which was very schmaltzy. So UCLA became a draw because they also gave me basically 2 years free. I had a very generous financial aid package. I had a work-study job. I had all the bells and whistles of what you want when you are trying to go to college and not spend a ton of money. I still graduated with some debt. My parents had some debt, but it was nothing. It was manageable, and I'm actually really glad I graduated with some debt because it taught me I had to get a job right away. I mean, I had to start working right out of college. I had to pay those bills. And I remember it was $154 to Sally Mae every single month. Interest-free, locked in, and I think I paid off all my loans by the time I had my first kid. I was 30. It was good for me. It taught me responsibility. So getting that financial aid package was very enticing, and it made UCLA seem a lot shinier, especially against NYU, which gave me nothing. And they, by the way, tend to give people nothing. And I never even went down the road with U Chicago. It was like I wanted to find out if I got in, and I got in, and then I was like, I don't want you anyway. So that's how it worked for me. And that's why I'm here, because when I started working with kids, whether I was tutoring or whether I was working on their college essays, I love to see them change their perspective and learn more about themselves. If you're a teacher, you know exactly what I'm talking about. There is nothing more satisfying than being able to influence a kid and enrich their confidence and seeing that they can do things that they may initially feel impossible, the way I felt when I was sitting in that college counselor's office going, what? Like, I'm never going to get into blah, blah, blah. And then seeing how it all panned out. So counseling kids through this process is extremely rewarding, especially when they feel kind of hopeless and don't really know where to turn and don't really know what. I don't really work with a ton of kids. People will call me. Let me back up. People will call me and say, listen, my kid's probably not like a lot of the kids that you work with. And I go, oh, how so? And they'll go, well, he really doesn't want to go to like a really fancy college. He really wants to go to, a state school that mainly accepts kids that get B's or whatever. And I'm like, oh, tell me more. Why? Because that's one of my favorite kind of kids. I want a kid who is a normal kid, who doesn't know what he or she wants to do, who doesn't know like what they want to major in or where I love that. And also the kids who aren't high performing, like, great. There are, I don't know how many schools. Let's ask ChatGPT. How many schools are there in this country? I'm going to say it's probably about 4,000 colleges and universities in this country. But everybody is obsessed with applying to the same 22 schools. And when I can actually open someone's eyes and go, you want to go to a big rah-rah school that has an 80% acceptance rate? Let's look at Kansas. Let's look at Missouri. Let's look at Iowa. I don't think Iowa has an 80% acceptance rate now, but let's look at an Oregon or an Arizona and they go, oh, I can get into those schools, Washington State, Oregon State. And they go, I can get into those schools. And I'm like, yeah. And the light shines and they go, oh my God, this is so cool. Like I can go to college even though I have a 2.8 GPA. Yeah, you can. There is a place for you, I promise. So, and then of course, like seeing them on social or having them reach back out to me, like working with you was awesome. I really realized my full potential. I really saw that something that I thought could be impossible was actually possible. But you do have to be realistic and you have to manage expectations. And that's like anything in the adult world. And that's part of why I'm doing Admit It, because I want people to talk about what their expectations were. Whether they're going to be sitting here talking about how they expected that they would become a hedge fund manager or expected they would become a famous actor, and it happened or it didn't or whatever. Admit it. Tell me how the process changed for you. Tell me what the mistakes were that you made along the way that really were actually the best things that could have happened. One of the main things that's changed, I would say, about college admissions, and people say this all the time, they're like, things were so different than they were for me 30 years ago. And a lot of the reasons why they will hire a private counselor is they will say, I know nothing. I don't get it. I went to my state school. I walked in. I signed up. I don't even think I sent in an application. And I made it happen. Or I only applied to one school. Now my kid, or the kid's first generation, and their parents never went to college. Or the parents are from a different country where, if you're from the UK or you're from anywhere in Europe or other countries, they have like 4 colleges. That's it. There's no like crazy application process that's competitive. If you're really, really smart, in France, let's say, you get tracked by the time you're 15 years old, you go to a certain public college. Public schools are for the smarty pants. And the private schools that you have to pay for are for the kids who didn't make it into the public schools. So those would be the ones who are it's more pay to play. Private schools are generally sort of looked down upon for that reason. It is a totally different culture. So people will say to me, oh, the application process is so different. Like, I don't know anything about it. And I just feel like there are all these schools that were so easy to get into in my day and now they're impossible. And you are correct. That is absolutely true. So much has changed. And yes, there are schools that 30 years ago were a joke to get into, meaning like you just, if you took in oxygen and you have a heartbeat, you're getting in, that are now a USC with a 9% acceptance rate. How does this happen? So parents will always say to me, I'm hiring you because things are so different now and I have no idea how things work. And of course, the culture is so crazy and makes everybody super stressed out, whether you're a Gossip Girl fan or you're a Gilmore Girls fan. It's like literally every TV show, everything you see, like just college, so hard, impossible. So that's one of the reasons why I kept doing what I was doing and working with kids, because I love to see the success that they achieved, not because they necessarily got into their first choice college, but because they ended up going where they were meant to go and they had a great time. And I've counseled kids through medical school applications, law school applications, full rides to places like Harvard Law and U Chicago and all that. During COVID, I was playing around a lot with Instagram stories and just posting, like, I called them shit show stories, and I would post stuff about my kids and my husband, and I was just like bored and wanting to entertain, and I realized that I loved the community that brought to me, the comments that I would get from people. The people would say, like, you're so real, this is really fun. And then I started kind of infusing a little bit of what I was doing with students on there, and people that really resonated with people. And then I hired a producer at some point to help me with my Instagram, like total basic B style, like mommy gram vibe. I didn't even really know if I was for work or if it was, was I going to become like a mom influencer? Like, again, totally like admit it. How did you do this? I'm admitting it. I had no idea what I was doing, and I was paying somebody who was kind of looking at me like, what is the purpose of this? Like, what are we promoting your business? Like, what is anyway? So because he's really good at his job and he's sitting right across from me and smiling because I'm giving him a compliment, he's really good at his job. He's not just a great producer, but also a great counselor. And he'd go, tell me more about this like college admissions stuff that you do, because this is really interesting to me. And he didn't go to college. He didn't pursue a traditional route in his life. And so I think it was even more compelling to go like, why are people so crazy about this? Like, what is this? And as he got to know my business more and the connections that I was making with families and all that stuff, it was kind of like, you need to be on TikTok talking about your process. You need to be sharing this work in a different way. Like, forget the mommy, bloggy, influency, blah, blah. We're moving on from that. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but it was like you have a calling, a really serious job that I think is compelling to people. So we go on TikTok, again, admitting it, had no idea what I was doing. We made up the college expert handle, I think on a whim. It was like I was like, what about college? What about the college expert? What about college? And with one E in the middle. That was the exciting part. So at college expert is born. I am making TikTok videos with Brandon laughing at me, like going, your sound is off. You have to have a plan. Like these videos, like what's wrong with you? They were a disaster. And I remember the first time Brandon called me, it was January of 2023. And he said, you have your first viral video. We had 5,000 views, 5,000. And I was like, oh, that's cool. And he was like, well, congratulations, because it's only going to go up from here. And I'm like, okay, whatever. And I remember, I think my kids were in the car and they were driving me crazy. I don't know. And then we saw what resonated. We saw what became popular. And of course, the algorithm and you get savvy about all that stuff, and you wanna be popular, and you wanna get likes, and you wanna get views. And that's important as a social media personality, but it's also really important to have integrity and to deliver information honestly, and also to be a voice that delivers something that maybe other voices don't. And I think that's where, or I know that's where I was providing a service to my clients already, and to be able to address millions of people doing that is like literally the biggest joy ever. So it blew up, and so starting the podcast was a natural progression, because there's so many topics that I want to talk about in longer form. And social's great, but they're small beats, they're touch points, they're quick, it's ADD, it's all that. So on the podcast, we're going to dig deeper. We're going to admit to, like I said, the mistakes, the path, the journey, how, with our guests talking about the admissions process. We're going to have admissions officers on. We're going to have hopefully some fun celebrity guests, writers, actors, people who took different paths with their kids, with themselves, and people in business, and people who've really made a mark doing things a little bit differently through the college process. And also, we're going to talk a lot about alternative admissions paths, and just basically managing expectations and exploring the real deal of how this all works. So you're going to keep seeing us admit it on the podcast each week. And that's a wrap for the first episode of Admit It. If you have questions you want me to answer on the next episode, please email admititwithalexis@gmail.com. Thanks for tuning in to Admit It with Alexis White. If you're working on your college applications and want guidance every step of the way, visit alexiscollegeexpert.com to find resources and support tailored for you. For even more tips, stories, and college insights, make sure to follow me on TikTok and Instagram @collegeexpert. Until next time, good luck, and remember, you don't have to do this alone.